Madam Chair, we're live.
Okay, at 5:01, I'm calling to order the Finance Committee for August 14th. And if we could get a roll call, please.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Counselor Cassett. Here. Counselor Lindell. Counselor Rivera.
Here.
Counselor Villarreal.
Present.
Chair Romero Worth.
I'm here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Terrific. All right, with that, we're going to go to approval of the agenda. Do we have changes to this agenda from staff?
No changes, Madam Chair.
Is there a motion?
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the agenda. All those in favor, aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? That motion passes. We have some items pulled off of the consent agenda. I believe they are items F, H, and G. Confirming with
Yes,
staff.
Madam Chair, that is correct. F, G, and H. F, H, and G.
F, H, and G. Okay. Anything else from the committee? And if not, is there a motion? F, H, and G. F, H. Yep, sorry. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor, aye. Anybody opposed? That motion passes as well. We are on to presentations. We have two this evening. The first is the City of Santa Fe Employee Benefits FY23 End of Year presentation by Aon. And we have Todd Burley, Alvin Valdez. Are those anybody else? Am I missing Director Oster?
Director Salazar.
Director Salazar, there we go. Sorry, I just didn't get the full drop down on my agenda. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you all. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Good evening, Madam Counselor and counselors. We are here to present our annual regular end of the year benefits presentation, our end of the year numbers. We have Aon present with us, and Todd Burley will be giving the presentation.
Good evening, Madam Chair, councilors. Good news for a change. So if you look at the first page in column A, those are fiscal year 23 results. Enrollment increased about 4%. In row 8, you can see that revenues in terms of what the city and then the city's employees contribute was up 12.8%. If you recall, that was a blend of 12% for non-union, 18.5% for union. So a total revenue of 21.75 million. Costs in total in row 12 were 19.2 million. So there was a $2.5 million surplus this year. Probably the first year in the last 5, I think, where there has been a surplus. There's a little, I have to throw a little rain on the parade, but not much. There was still a surplus. But if you go to page 2, column D, in the planned funding, we changed the format of this report a couple of years ago, so now it tracks more closely with the city's actual budget and finances. So in column D, sorry, you'll see in July, December, and June, there were 3 paycheck months. So this year, revenue is probably overstated by about 700,000. But that still leaves a surplus of about 2 million for the year. Next page, high cost claimants always tell the story of how well you did or did not do in the previous year. You can see there was not a drop in number, but a drop in payments for those of about 500,000 for this fiscal year. That's always going to drive your financial results. Last page is dental. There have been no changes to the dental premiums in several years. You'll see an increase in column D in revenue, or I'm sorry, in column C in revenue, but again, that's due to the three paycheck months rather than 2. Any questions on this?
Questions from the committee? Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a clarification. Can you remind us the columns, what's the difference between subscribers and members again?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, yes, contracts on that first page are employees. So there were an average of 1,116 employees. Average members, so that's employees plus their dependents, spouses and children. So there were 2,550 on average.
Okay, so when we look at the other columns, subscribers is our staff members,
Actual employees,
employees, sorry. And
members includes dependents, their
got it.
children, domestic partners,
okay,
spouses, etc.
great. Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Other questions from the committee? Looks like you're good so far. Was there more to tell us, or was that,
Nope.
that's the highlights?
Oh, yes,
All right.
I like these.
Well, given that, if that's the highlights, let me try one more time. Any other questions? Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify, so what do you, based on these trends and the numbers you're seeing, what are you thinking is gonna occur for next year? And as we look at next year's,
Madam
budget.
Chair, yeah, Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, the city of Santa Fe is my only client this year that did not see double-digit increases. I think we got ahead of the curve a little and implemented the increase in time to catch it. I have seen in other New Mexico employers a steep rise in the number of high-cost claimants, either due to deferred care from the pandemic. I think that's the bulk of it. Typically cancers. So that has not hit the city of Santa Fe. I don't want to say yet because it may not, but I've seen that in every other client. We've also seen it nationwide. On top of that, inflation. There will be inflationary pressures this year. Healthcare employees saw steep increases in their pay, and hiring in the healthcare sector was unprecedented. So we are seeing trend rates that were 5 or 6% rise to the 8 to 10% level. But again, we are starting from a good place. So
and when you said that we caught it before the increase, what did you mean by that? That we were able to avoid those, that we ended up, you said not being in the red?
yeah, Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, yes. So a couple of things help. Most employers are on a calendar year plan. So they're seeing those increases come up for 1/1 of 2024. In the past few years, because of the pandemic, they were hesitant to make increases to premiums. They didn't want to burden their employees with something with additional financial pressures on top of the pandemic. So they've kind of kicked the can down the road, and now they're seeing those steep increases this year, upcoming this year.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the info.
Okay, other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Our second presentation tonight is an audit update. And that is also an overview, and that would be for the FY22 audit. And we have Director Oster.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am pleased to report that we continue to work full steam ahead on FY22 and FY23. We're also in the process of doing our first month-end close in FY24, which, as you'll recall, is very important. That's a step that we implemented during FY23 to help us get caught up. So we're continuing that process. Our new controller, Josie Bolden, is taking the taking the lead on that month-end close process. So very pleased with the direction that that is taking. As I mentioned last week in governing body, we submitted the trial balance for FY 22 to Carr-Riggs Ingram last Monday, a week ago today. That's an important step in the audit process. That is what they actually audit. The numbers in the trial balance are what are used to prepare the financial statements, and those are the numbers that are actually audited as a part of the financial statement audit. And Madam Chair, those are my updates for this evening.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Okay, thank you. All right, we have 3 items that have been pulled tonight. The first one is item F. And I believe Councilors Cassett and Lindell pulled this item. Item F is a request for approval of a memorandum of understanding per agreement 2023-0208 CSD/PBT between Santa Fe County and the City of Santa Fe in the total amount of $25,000 for reimbursement of funds spent in pursuant. The language in this title is interesting, of providing library services through the city's South Side Library branch. And we have with us Margaret Nell, Library Division Director. And who wants to start? Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome. Glad that you're here tonight. I just, do you know how long this agreement has existed with the county at a rate of 25,000?
Yes, Councilor Lindell, Chairwoman. We have had an agreement with the county since 2017 for the $25,000 amount. We have also had sort of an unofficial agreement or other agreements since I was able to go back to 2006 for approximately 25 to 15 to 30,000. It varied per year.
So it's stayed pretty level since 2006.
I would say that it's been more level since 2017 when the agreement went into place because the numbers kind of jumped around a little bit.
Okay. My point is that I think that we need to take a review of this, and not just for libraries, but also probably for our recreational facilities. And we should probably be pursuing some memorandums of agreement with the county on some payment on those facilities also. And that I see Director Tucker's in the room and can hear this. You know, certainly the overall costs of the Southside Library, I don't know what the operating costs are, sizable, between the fixed costs of the facility and personnel and the different things we buy and sponsor. I think $25,000 is a mere pittance of our operating costs of that. And I think that we should probably find a way to increase that. So that's my point, in that I think we should look at that, and we should probably also look at some of our other facilities that are freely used by county residents. We want people to use them, but we also would like to share some costs in them, because that's what would be fair. So that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Cassett.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for being here. My questions and comments are along that same line. And I am curious how that funding is calculated. How did we get to 25,000 this year?
That has
Or
been the fixed
2017.
cost. Oh, sorry, Councilor Cassett, that has been the fixed cost since 2017
Okay.
in the agreement.
And-
When I went through everything, I didn't see anything that specified what that was pegged to.
Okay. Do we happen to know kind of how that balances out with how much more it costs us to serve the number of residents at the county, like what percentage of city versus county are utilizing the library. As Councilor Lindell stated, it's we of course want the county residents to have access to the library. That's really important. They're such wonderful facilities, but we do a lot and we could use some funding to assist with continuing to provide that programming.
Yes, Councillor Cassett, we have approximately 18.4% of our cardholders live in the county.
18.4%?
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to assume that this is not 18.4% of our budget.
Probably not, no.
Okay. Yeah, I had the similar thoughts as Councilor Lindell as we're really looking at how we balance this out, how we partner with the county, how we can continue to really provide that programming to as many people as possible. Some assistance with the financials, both the library and the rec center, I think could be really beneficial for us. Also, I'm assuming it says through the South Side Library, but I'm guessing does it filter through the South Side and then is it, they use all branches. So I'm curious how that balances out.
It all goes to the South Side branch.
Okay.
I think historically that had the largest number of county residents using it. Not
Mhm.
sure if that's still the case now if I reran
Okay.
the numbers, but that was, I think, the reason originally.
Okay, great. All right. Good to know. Yeah, I think just taking a look, when we can renegotiate this, I don't know if it's next year, but really starting to take a look at those numbers and what makes sense, because we all know the cost of things has also gone up quite a bit, especially in the last, what's that been, 7 years? So how we can renegotiate that, I think, is going to be important. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Councilor Rivera. Councilor Rivera, you are Amanda Chavez tonight.
Always change. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm reading here that, so is this 25,000 per year for 4 years? Or is this, the max is 25,000 over 4 years
It's per year.
per year? Okay. I thought I read that the total compensation is 25,000, so. Yeah, the total compensation to be paid under this agreement must not exceed 25,000, but that's per year. Okay.
That is correct.
Of that 18.4% of users, do we know how many of them are children? Do you have that breakdown?
I don't, but I could get that to you.
Be interesting to see. And then last question, do we get funding from any other sources based on the total number of users that come to the library?
The primary funding that we get outside of the city and county is through the state, and they base that on city's population.
Just the population,
Yep.
not users of the library.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mm.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Is there a motion?
Second.
Motion and a second to approve this item. Can we get a roll call, please?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Councilor Cassett,
Yes.
Councilor Lindell, Councilor Rivera,
Yes.
Councilor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councilor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. All right, on to item G, request for approval to enter into an exclusive negotiation agreement between the city of Santa Fe and, the Santa Fe Art Institute for the purpose of performing due diligence activities and negotiating terms for land and building disposition and redevelopment of the Midtown Visual Arts Center pursuant to the city's request for proposal number 23-17-P. We have Director Rich Brown. We have Lee Logston, Midtown Asset Development Manager. I'm assuming, we have from the City Attorney's Office, Pat Fagali. Do we have Daniel Hernandez on Zoom as well?
Madam Chair, members of the council, good evening. Mr. Hernandez should be on Zoom.
Are we seeing him, Director Oster?
Madam Chair, yes, now we see him.
Great. Okay, and again, Councilor Lindell, I believe you pulled this item. You did.
Chair, I think that most of the questions that I have on this probably need to be discussed in executive session. I could go through this entire thing page by page, but I think that it would be more productive if it were done in executive session, so all counselors would have a chance to weigh in and talk about it. So,
You want to move it forward without recommendation?
I was going to make a motion to move it forward without recommendation and that this be heard in executive session by the entire council.
Is there a second? At the next, not at the next regular meeting, I believe. Okay, scheduled for the 30th. Counselor Cassett?
The only thing that makes me nervous again is we need to get it to governing body and it does have to pass a committee. I imagine it would be able to pass in quality of life, but, or I don't know, public works utilities.
Well, we don't have a second yet, so if we don't get a second, we can entertain another motion. So I'll go back to asking, is there a second on a motion to move forward without recommendation? Counselor, who are you? Lindell?
Well, if that's the case, then I'll go through and ask a whole bunch of questions.
Well, we can do this at executive session. And you can vote no on a motion to move it forward.
I understand that.
Okay. Up to you.
Do we have a motion?
I don't believe there's a second on your motion to do it without recommendation. So is there a motion, an alternate motion?
I'll move to approve.
Is there a second on that?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve this item. Is there further discussion? Councilwoman Villarreal.
I'm wondering if it would still be helpful to have an executive session, but it'll go through the committee process and then we'll hear it on August 30th
Yeah.
and then we'll have the executive session.
Yeah, no, I think they have noted that we would like to hear this in executive session on the 30th.
Okay.
So that's going to happen.
And then I didn't know if Counselor Lindell wanted to share any questions that may we be able to hear now so we can just ponder if we need to.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just went to you because you had your hand up. Back to you, Counselor Lindell.
Well, I'm concerned that we're passing something that I don't think is a group that we've seen the proposal. And we're passing it, which is a big concern to me. So let me start. I won't go through the whole document, but I'll ask a few things about it. So did we have options on this RFP? Did we have more than one proposal to look at?
Well, hold on a second, though. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, Madam Chair and Councilor Lindell, I'm going to ask our legal person to answer that question. I don't know if we can answer it at this committee. It might be something that we have to answer in executive session.
Yeah, executive session. I think that's an executive session question.
Why can't that be answered?
Yeah, I don't make up the rules.
Councilor Lindell, it's a procurement law issue about proposals, sharing information before governing body approval of any contract, I think.
Councilor Lindell, you still have the floor.
I'm scanning. Why in this proposal as opposed to the last one that we looked at, have we granted 12 months on this with possible extension of 4 months, so 16 months of time?
Madam Chair.
The
Councilor Lindell?
previous one was less time.
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, I'm going to ask Mr. Hernandez to answer that question. He's been working on the ERNA process with the team.
Sure. Good evening. We will see, each ENA will look differently. There will be different time periods based on the proposers or the offerers' scope of work that they want to do prior to the disposition and development agreement being awarded. From our perspective, it's a risk management issue. So we want to allow them to do as much due diligence as possible so that the more they do, the more they know, the more they are informed prior to entering into the DDA. They're able to say, yes, this is the acquisition parameters in which we're going to move forward. Here's what we know. If we're comfortable with the rehab or the development costs related to this project, based on the amount of work that they're going to do upfront prior to the disposition development agreement. From our perspective, it provides an opportunity to know that they've actually done their homework. They know what they're getting into, and we feel that as though that they're able to understand all the risks and challenges ahead of them, and have all of the team and financing and other issues addressed. Again, prior to the disposition development agreement. If we find out during the ANA period that a lot of these things are just hurdles that either party is challenged by and doesn't want to, the offer may not want to overcome, then we can negotiate that. And if the agreement is to terminate the ENA and end that agreement, then that would be the end of the process, rather than entering into the DNA and finding out a year later that things started to unravel. I think from our perspective as a city, we would want to make sure that we've addressed as many issues as possible. The Visual Arts Center is complex. It has much deferred maintenance. It's an old building. It was specifically designed for a specific series of purposes related to educational uses. So there's a lot of adaptive reuse that has to be considered, and we want to make sure that our offer is analyzing all of that prior to the disposition to make sure that the proposal that they've given to us is actually implementable. And the part of our role as a partner is to work with them in figuring that out and negotiating the deal so that when we get to the DDA, it's something that we all feel comfortable can move ahead successfully.
That's fine. I just think that 16 months is a long time for us to essentially have this property off the market and in an exclusive agreement. Seems like a very long time to me. On the bottom of page 8, it says, the final sentence, this may include financial support for environmental remediation as well as site activations during the ENA period. What might that be, and what might those costs be?
We don't know what the cost will be yet. And again, the RFP basically made it clear that the city's commitment to this project is more on the land side and not on the cash side in their proposals. Although we do want to make sure that we continue involving the community in the redevelopment of Midtown. So these early activation projects, both the Visual Arts Center and the Performing Arts Center, we want to make sure that they're doing ongoing activation work, and we want to make sure that we support them whenever we can. There hasn't been specific requests around program, et cetera, but those are the kinds of, they discuss it generally inside of their RFP, but we'll begin pinning those things down as we move forward. We'll encourage them to go to their usual funders for those operating costs, but to the extent possible, we may want to participate with them and provide food or space or whatever it is, the collaborative effort that we made during the public engagement process with them.
Do we have any budget set aside for this activity?
We haven't negotiated any of those terms yet, so no, we don't have a budget set right now.
Okay, on page 12. 4.6, development, budget, and financing plan. At what point do we expect to see that?
I have to. In the schedule, let me pull up the schedule. In the schedule, there is a discussion about the putting together their capital campaign plan and their financing plan. We'll set benchmarks for them as part of the as they're developing their capital campaign. My experience is that one of the first steps is just working with a capital campaign consultant to organize and understand the capital campaign process. the potential for raising capital and what type of, from whom, why, and how much. So we'll set benchmarks with them along the way to make sure that they're developing a capital campaign. And it'll depend on our level of comfort with how the quality of that campaign and discussions with them about its implementation and its success. So we'll see benchmarks and we'll establish benchmarks along the way during the ENA process.
On page 17, it seems, it appears to me that, and further in, there's a chart that shows performance benchmarks. It sounds to me that if the offerer notifies the city that they're not going to meet a benchmark, that the fact that they notified us is all they need to do, and that not meeting those benchmarks isn't considered default or cause for termination of the agreement. That doesn't seem like that puts a very firm timeline on this. And the same thing in the next paragraph. At what point, when benchmark after benchmark might be missed, would we consider that a default?
In 6.3, there's discretionary termination by a party. So there, you know, while specific, B particularly outlines an opportunity for us to negotiate that unlikely result of of terms in a DDA. If they're not meeting benchmarks, it's unlikely that they're going to meet the terms that we're going to be establishing for a DDA, like meeting benchmarks in the capital campaign, their ability to pull the team together to do the assessments and analyze the costs associated with rehabilitation, to be able to give us a number that we're satisfied with that goes inside the DDA for the amount of and the time it will take to implement the renovations and redevelopment and reuse of the project. So, you know, we'll be able to, based on ongoing discussions and collaboration with them, we'll be able to determine whether they would be able to negotiate the terms of the DDA to execute the project.
Section 551, that's on page 19. Regular progress reports every 30 days. Will these be shared with the council?
At your request, yes.
I'm making that request. The next section, weekly conferences and meetings. It says weekly conferences, and then at the last sentence says frequency will be determined by project phase and need. So is it weekly or as needed?
As needed. I mean, my gut tells me at the beginning we're going to have a lot of meetings, but as they're sort of investigating inside the buildings, it may change. And so we'll continue to monitor their progress. We don't want this project. This is an important project for them and for us. And so we'll make sure that we're monitoring the scope of work and to get through the schedule that they've outlined for us.
Comment on 5.5.3, public engagement, communications and hearings. I actually didn't see any part of the budget directed toward that. So that's just a comment.
Okay.
I did see the 6.3 discretionary termination. I can only move along with this as fast as it loads on my iPad, so that's part of how this happens. In the I see the benchmarks on page 37. I'm assuming all the maroon are benchmarks. Some of them are marked that are called out as benchmarks, but other ones are just in the maroon color. So are all the maroon color ones benchmarks?
Yes.
The source of funds, plan for securing funds to city, can this be defined?
You mean the amount that they may be requesting? Is that, I'm sorry, what page is that on?
I see on here that in the end of February of 24, they have on here to launch a capital campaign.
Okay, yeah, 22, 28, 24. Mhm.
And that capital campaign goes through. How long does it go? It's hard for me to tell from this.
Well, it has, I mean, if you look up on the line that says capital campaign 8/31/23 through 3/6/24, it outlines that time frame. And the capital campaign, when they submit it to us, when we'll review their capital campaign, their approach, their analysis of it, as well as their schedule, it will determine the length of the capital campaign. I would assume that their capital campaign, based on their budget, their RFP submission, will be phased. And it is, I don't have the RFP. I can open up the RFP, their RFP submission, but it will last the term of the renovation timeframe. I have to open up.
I mean, it says here 135 days.
It'll last longer than that, I'm sure, but these are the things that we will work out in the E&A. That's the reason why we want this E&A time period. There's still a lot of unknowns. Look, they responded to an RFP sort of in a vacuum of the information we gave them in an RFP. The purpose of the E&A is like, well, we didn't know about this and we don't know about this and we're not certain about this, but here's our basic proposal. So the purpose of the E&A, to give us and to give both of us and to give them the length of time that they need, these are the kind of details we want to work out with them.
Do we have a number for the capital campaign?
Their total capital campaign is approximately 15 million.
Okay, let's note that. On page 38, under recitals B, it says the grantee is a real estate developer. Are they a real estate developer?
But on what page are you looking?
Page 38
Of the packet or of the?
of the packet. 38 of 51 under recitals. A says the grantor owns the property, and B says the grantee is a real estate developer.
Well, the offeror responded, so this is the access agreement. The offeror responded as a developer operator of the property. So yes, they are a development entity.
On this page 40 of 51, 2.1, I noted, and then later on, it's addressed. So in doing their due diligence, if the property is damaged, they're responsible for fixing it, correct?
During the course of their investigation, and I'll just a wild example, they tear into a wall to look whether there's something inside the wall. They're responsible for repairing the wall and leaving it as in the condition in which they found it.
Okay. Those are just some general questions that I have that I'm deeply concerned about the size of the capital campaign that we're talking about and the ability to complete that. The other questions I have, I will have to ask in executive session.
Thank you so much for taking the time to go through that level of detail, Councilwoman. It's greatly appreciated. It's a testament to your commitment to this project, and it's greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's very, very hard to approve a project like this for me when we aren't talking about the actual proposal that's given to us, just these more general terms. You know, I did take the time this weekend to study the actual proposal. I can't talk about it here at this point in time, but it's, like I said, it's hard for me to approve this without talking about the specifics of the actual proposal.
I know, and it's the nature of this process, and I apologize at one level, it's out of my hands, at another level. I will say, though, that, you know, we're trying to figure out through the CNA process an opportunity for us to give us the time to actually get into the nitty-gritty details that I know you love. And the ENA is the avenue that most cities pursue in order to, like, I don't have all the answers yet. Let's get them down and work through. And you know, each parcel will create its own set of issues, and this one is complex. These existing buildings are not easy to understand. But so, you know, a lot of the questions you have are the details that we worked out through this ENA process. So, yeah. Thank you for understanding that.
Thank you, Counselor. Other questions from the committee? We get a roll call, please.
Certainly, Madam Chair. And this is on the motion to approve.
Yes.
Councillor Caston,
Yes.
Councillor Lindell, Councillor Rivera,
Yes.
Councillor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councillor Merworth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we are on to item, let's see, H, I believe. H, this is a resolution sponsored by Councillor Michael Garcia, who's joining the committee this evening. A resolution proposing a ballot question to be submitted to the city's voters during the November 7th, 2023 regular local election regarding amending the city's charter to limit the mayor's ability to vote when there is a tie. And I believe we have somebody from the Legislative and Policy Office, guess not. But we do have the sponsor here. Councillor Garcia, did you want to address this bill?
Sure, I can give a brief overview. This was one of the recommendations made by the Charter Review Commission. And ultimately, this was a recommendation that covered a vast majority of topics. It was basically the restructuring of the legislative and the executive body and providing more of a separation of powers. As I was working with the legislative team, there could have been 8 proposed questions just on this one recommendation. As we dug deeper into this topic, it became evident that we needed much more time to really untangle and address this particular recommendation, just because some of this recommendation overlapped with another recommendation, which was the budgeting and the finance recommendation. And so to honor the work of the committee, I felt it was best to kind of move forward with what was the kind of less untangled portion. And it actually was the first part of the resolution that was drafted from our legal team in regards to the vote, because as I mentioned, there were eight proposed questions that could have come out of this. Some of the others were the number of votes needed to remove the city manager, having a supermajority to remove the city attorney, establishing a mayor veto power, then allowing for the city council to assign its own committee membership and committee leadership. Then others would be restoring the budget authority power to the city manager, have the city manager be more of an operational versus an administrative role, and adopt minimum qualifications for that position. Require the city manager to provide for public communication on behalf of the city. So that was that whole big recommendation, and felt it was this was the best way to honor their work, and the work for the remaining part of the recommendation will continue. This was just the portion of the recommendation that was ready to move forward for consideration for a ballot question pertaining to a proposed charter amendment. So hopefully that helps clarify why it's only one question versus addressing the entire recommendation. And ultimately, as I mentioned, this came from the Charter Review Commission.
Thank you, Counselor. I believe Counselors Cassett and Lindell pulled this item. Who wants to start? Counselor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. So let's go backwards a little bit. Where has this worked before? And well, let's just leave it there. Where has this worked before?
It currently works with our Planning Commission. Planning Commission chair only votes in the instance of a tie.
How about in a larger look at it, like within a city with a mayor and a council?
I'll have to do a little more research on that. I know that we've implied such structure in the past. But if we're looking at other levels of government, this works profoundly well when you're looking at our state legislative process. On the Senate side, you have the lieutenant governor who sits in as a presider of the state Senate and will break ties in the instance of that. If you look at the federal level and in the same body of the U.S. Senate, the vice president will sit as presider as well as break any ties as needed. So this has worked on many different levels, Counselor.
Those are pretty big bodies compared to the eight members that we have on our council. I don't really understand what problem this solves, how this really changes anything in terms of moving policy forward. And I don't think that this is, unless there's a lot going on that I'm totally unaware of, I don't know that this is a troubling issue to the public, and that we don't have bigger issues to look at than this one. The other real concern that I have with this is in looking at the memorandum, it says whether or not singling out the mayor's voting rights is a logical first step is unclear, given that the Charter Commission's stated version was a holistic restructuring purposed for a clarified balance of powers. I don't think that carving one little piece out of this really accomplishes anything when this was a much bigger philosophical conversation than just the mayor voting to break a tie. And it then goes on to say the resolution neither articulates a rationale for reverting to the mayor's voting rights to their state in 2008, nor explains what is addressed by removing the mayor's role as a full voting member. It's not clear why the proposal is the ideal first step to considering the rest of the Charter Commission's version, which could be a long way into the future. I really, I heard your explanation, but I don't really see what the purpose in this is and how this changes things in the big picture of how we proceed as a council. So I don't think this is an issue that's troubling the public.
I'd be happy to clarify you, Counselor. I would respectfully disagree because I've heard loud and clear from a lot of my constituents that there needs to be a clear separation of power between the executive and the legislative. And the current role that the current process we have allows for the mayor to play both an executive and a legislative role. And you don't see that across many governments if it's very unique. And I think when this was developed, I think that the voters thought it was going to be carried out in a different manner. And they thought they were going to be getting a full-time mayor, not a full-time mayor and a full-time counselor in one position. And so I think this begins to allow for that separation of powers. It doesn't prohibit the mayor at the moment from introducing legislation, which is also another concern I've heard loud and clear from constituents. So I think we might be hearing from different factions of the community, but I do think from the folks I've heard, and obviously from the Charter Review Commission, given that it is their recommendation that there does need to be that separation of powers, that this is an issue, and we need to ensure that there are the appropriate checks and balances within our city government. And so by removing the mayor's voting privileges, unless there is a tie, that allows for that first step of separation of powers. And then, as I mentioned, because we are under extreme time constraint, which was very unfortunate, we can work to implement the rest of the recommendations. This, again, would be the first step. In regards to the reference to the memo, I find, it's been very unfortunate that there has been memos drafted that will slant towards a specific stance that might be taken. We saw that with the fee in lieu of resolution or memo, which is clearly slanted. Where I find the language in this memo a bit disappointing, given I've worked with staff and we worked to clarify it. And a lot of this language is coming at the 11th hour, and I'm not going to battle back and forth with staff. The intention around this and other resolutions for the Charter Review Commission recommendations was to get something in front of us so we can debate it. And I think that's where we're at. Let's look at the topic. The topic at hand in this particular recommendation or this resolution is, should the voting privileges be removed from the mayor except for in the instance of a tie break? And I think from the constituents I've heard from, yes, this is a great first step, and it's not the last step. There will be many additional steps. As I mentioned, this particular recommendation potentially had 8 questions that could have been posed, which were really tied to a lot of policy, and we just didn't have enough time to get that work done. So to ensure that the work was done and it was clear and concise for ultimately the city council to consider, but not only for the city council, but for the residents to consider the ballot question and for them to know what they were voting on. That's why we landed at the 1. Because it was my intention to bring forth the full recommendation. We just didn't have enough time to do that. And so that's why we have this 1 recommendation. And I think it's a good recommendation. And I think it's a great first step for us to begin to restructure our government in a manner that will make us not only stronger, but more accountable to each other. Right now, we've got this one position where you have an individual playing both roles. And this is this is, not looking at the individual as a person. And I think that's one thing we need to make loud and clear. This is the role that we've seen how it's played out. And it's just doesn't lead for effective governance nor good governments, in my opinion.
I have no understanding of how this makes us more accountable to each other and how this, you just said how this is played out. I really don't know what you're talking about, Counselor, with how this has played out. This was presented as not one issue. It was part of a much bigger proposal. And part of that proposal had to do with having and allowing for a veto to pull out one part of this. I don't think that works. This was a much more complex recommendation. I don't see how this solves any problem that we're facing in how we do business here.
Okay, Counselor Cassett.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. The balance of powers issue was one that I was really interested in when I spoke to the Charter Review Commission. I really emphasized that I felt that the balance of power needed to be adjusted. So this is something that I really want to look at. And I agree with Councilor Garcia that it is going to take a while to untangle that. It is pretty complicated. Part of the issue is our structure of an even counselor for districts, 2 counselors per district. It definitely brings that challenge to, with the even number, what happens in a tie. I would prefer to see this as part of the whole, because we don't know what that whole looks like at this time. And I wouldn't want to keep swapping the power of the vote back and forth. And I do think that this needs to be considered as part of a more holistic part of the suggestion of how we balance the powers. I also don't see how this changes things, because if you have a 4-4 vote on the council and the mayor comes in for a 5-4 vote, then obviously that breaks it. If you have a 3-5 vote on the council and the mayor's not voting, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which way the mayor would have voted. So I don't see that it is solving the problem of taking the mayor out of the legislative role if they can still present legislation. They're still in a legislative role. So I really think that the balance of power is crucial. And it is something that we've talked about in many different instances. We've talked about this in regards to council having staff and resources. And I do think that we need to find a way to separate, to take the mayor off of the council, off of the legislative branch, be a full-time executive, look at a veto, look at ability to override a veto. But again, we're not sure what that full holistic structure is. So I think that this is just too early, given that there is still so much to explore on this particular topic. And when I think about the way the votes would potentially land, it doesn't really make a difference in whether or not something or not is passed. So those are my comments at this time. Well, I guess maybe Councilor Meyerworth, I might have a question for you. Why did the Charter Review Commission, the previous Charter Review Commission, change this? Because this was the way, given it was a part-time mayor at that point. But I am curious what the reasoning was behind to change this previously.
You mean change it so that
the mayor had a vote on every single item?
Yeah, so I think, as I recall, that the thinking was the mayor had been historically had been a ceremonial figure, and there was a desire to create more power in that mayor. And had it been my preference, we would have then taken the mayor off the council then. And the problem was what we were doing was a pretty big change, and it was just a little bit too far for people to be ready for. So this piece was to keep the mayor on the council, but give the mayor a vote. And in addition, make the mayor a full-time executive. So it was just something we didn't have the ability to do at the time. And I wish we had, because I think I agree with you, it's the direction we need to move in.
Okay, thank you. I think it's interesting because my same logic applies of, did it actually provide the mayor with more power? Because it still would have been the same as the way that the chips fall. But I think you're right that it is a larger process that we need to look at. And we don't know what that's going to look like. So I'd rather see this come forward as a whole package of really that separation of powers. And I would like to see us figure out a way to get the mayor off of the legislative body and fully in that executive role, and what that looks like. We will have to do the homework to find out. Thank you.
Other questions from the committee? Other comments? Is there a motion? Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my question, this one was important and it was kind of spread out all over their recommendations, but the recommendations were within the original language. And so I was having a hard time dissecting what the charter was saying was new possibilities versus what's already in there. And what I didn't get from this ballot, but proposed ballot measure is if that vote, if the mayor were to only vote to break a tie, would the mayor then still be the presiding chair? So they would still attend and be in our meetings like.
Councilor Garcia, if you could speak into the mic, please.
Yes, so the only change that would be implemented is that having a vote on all matters. All other assigned roles would be applicable. They would be the presider over the governing body meeting, so they would still ultimately be a member of what we call the governing body. And so, because the question then came, do we need to clarify it further? Because does the mayor have a tie-break vote on committee meetings? And the way the language is written, no, they only tie-break governing body meeting votes. And so they would be the presider and facilitator of the city council or the governing body meetings. And that's the way it works in the majority of these bodies that have the mayor as a tiebreaker vote, because it allows for them to partake in the proceedings of the meeting, and they don't have to kind of get called in at 5 o'clock to say, hey, you're going to be on a tiebreak vote. It allows them to participate in the process. And if there's a tiebreak vote, then they go to the mayor to break that vote.
And I'm curious, trying to remember, Albuquerque has.
Veto power for Mayor Keller.
And does Mayor Keller attend the meetings?
No, he has
Okay.
staff that attends the meetings
Okay.
for him.
So that was kind of what I think the Charter Commission was leading to. With the veto power, or signature and veto should be exercised within 30 days of an ordinance adoption. And then I couldn't extract from the other pieces what else they were proposing as new. And so that was why this one was hard for me, because I agree with your intention. And then I'm trying to figure out what else did we need to package it so that that we would have this balance of power that we've been seeking, especially when it comes to the budget process and some other ways we do business. I think there needs to be kind of this clear break of what we have now to what we want to go towards. So maybe you could say more about how this one piece of a bigger change that's needed. I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example of how it would, I don't know, change dynamics possibly. I mean, that's kind of some of the issues I feel like happen, the dynamics on our council, our governing body. And I'm trying to figure out if this change would change that dynamic.
I think that's a great question, Councilwoman. From a personal perspective, I think it would put a lot of, I guess, additional spotlight on that tiebreaker vote, whereas any of us of 9 can be considered a tiebreaker vote, and nobody knows who would be ultimately labeled with breaking the tie. You know, so for example, when you look at the Senate versions, whether it be state or federal, it then becomes very important who's in that role, right? And the background and who plays that role. Because as we've seen on the federal level, that tiebreaker vote has come into play on very critical issues. And so it would provide more of a spotlight and justification on why a particular vote was taken in the instance of a tiebreak vote. So I think it would change dynamics. And that's in my personal opinion, because right now, when there is that 5-4 vote, who was the tiebreaker? You can't assign it to anybody. Whereas when you've got the one pinch hitter that is going to be up for a tiebreaker vote, they'll be the person that the public asks, well, why did you break the tie in this way or that way? And I think that's ultimately the intention around having that tiebreaker vote.
Thanks for that additional info. I think now, as it stands, the mayor does end up unofficially breaking a tie because the mayor is the last vote. But yeah, I feel like I need to ruminate on this because I see where you're going and actually what the Charter Commission was intending. And then there's these other pieces I want for it to be whole. So yeah, I'll yield the floor for now. Thank you.
Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if you recall this from the previous Charter Commission report, but I remember hearing that the reason the mayor was given voting authority or asked to vote on all topics is because the public wanted to know where the mayor stood on all topics. So in a 3-5 vote, the mayor would never have to give his or her opinion about any topic. So no one would know how the mayor stands on anything except for tie votes, breaking tie votes. So, which he currently does now again because he's the last vote. So I struggle with this one. I'll likely support it tonight because I want to hear them all together on our August 22nd meeting, and hopefully make a decision there on all these. But that's my biggest concern with this one. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Is there a motion?
Move to deny.
We have a motion and a second to deny. I would just add a couple of comments, which is, again, this is a recommendation from the Charter Review Commission, part of a much larger package. I would note that when we convene a Charter Review Commission, there's a 3-step process. And the first process is we convene the commission, they meet, they consider various things, they come up with recommendations. They're exactly that, recommendations. There is nothing that says we have to do what is recommended. And in fact, we are elected to impart our own knowledge, our own information, our own sense of these problems and experiences, since we live this on a daily to weekly basis. And our opinions matter too. And so I think we should have the opportunity to take the time and shape things. And I think, and so just to continue on that process, then we, whatever we decide is ready to put in front of the voters or is something that should be put in front of the voters, then we do that. And then the voters vote to affirm whatever we have put forward. So there's 3 steps in this process. I think what we think is also important. And I don't think that we have to take, I don't think we need to, put forward exactly what is put forward by the Charter Review Commission in order to honor their work. We are putting this in our quote unquote constitution because it has to be approved by the voters. It's very hard to change. And so I too would like to see this not be put forward on its own because we don't really know. We have some broad ideas about how we would balance the power. We would take the mayor off the council, likely give the mayor veto authority. We might do some other things, or maybe not. And so I think it would be better to consider this in the context of the overall changes that we would like to make in terms of balancing power. And I just one final note would note that on this idea that the mayor shouldn't be able to introduce legislation, the governor has bills at the legislature. She can't introduce them, but she has legislators who do that work for her. So and it's as bills move through the legislative process, it is talked to very frequently about this being a governor's bill. So just make that comment. So, all right, we have a motion and a second. Can we get a roll call, please?
Certainly. Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Rivera,
Can you remind me what the motion was?
Motion to deny.
No.
Counselor Villarreal,
No.
Counselor Romero-Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, I believe that is the last item that we had on consent. So we do have some introductions. I don't know, is somebody making those introductions?
Can Counselor Garcia can?
Counselor Garcia does not sit on the finance committee, so he can't.
All right, I'll introduce a consideration of a resolution submitting a ballot question to the city's voters during the November 7th, 2023 regular local election regarding amending the city's charter to regulate adoption of the city's budget and capital program, require adoption of ordinances, updating financial processes and accounting systems, require sufficient staff to facilitate timely completion of independent audits, and consolidate those new sections with existing sections of the charter regarding finance topics, including investments, procurement, independent audit committee, in a new article called financial management.
Okay, and do you want to introduce the second one as well?
Like doing that much reading, but okay. A resolution, consideration of a resolution proposing 2 ballot questions to be submitted to the city voters during the November 7th, 2023 regular local election to amend the city's charter to require the governing body to establish an Office of Equity and Inclusion and a Human Rights Commission in ordinance.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we have introduction of 2 more ballot questions. Next item on our agenda is an executive session, which we do not have. Next item is matters from staff. Director Oster, do you have anything for us this evening?
None at this time, Madam Chair.
All right, matters from the committee. Matters from the chair. Our next meeting is not until September, and that is Tuesday, September 5th. And with that, we are adjourned.